Hi there. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to cover a button mold in floss thread using a satin wrapping method, which is a great foundation for any needlework or crochet that you may wish to put over a button. So let's get started. The first thing that we need to do is to create a warp. A warp is a group of threads all measured out to the same length. When you're weaving, you have to be very, very careful when you're creating a warp. When you're covering a button, you don't have to be quite so careful. And so as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm just winding some thread around these posts so that I have a group of threads that are all the same length. You get used to how many. I'm going to put whatever this is. So because I was talking, and just to let you know that for this particular one, I'm using a flat filament silk. I'm using Soyo Valley. I like the sheen. It works really well for covering using this method. So I've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 ends. Each individual thread is an end, okay? And they're all out at the same length. So now what I need to do is I need to wrap them under tension. There's quite a few ways to do this. The easiest is, again, between two posts. Now, when I say about two posts, you can use two clamps. You can use really anything that you want to use. You can also put these onto a spool. It's a little bit more difficult to put it onto a spool, but the same principle will still work. And what I'm doing is I'm wrapping it at a figure of 8, and this will help me to keep the tension. And I'm keeping it as flat and as even as I can. Okay? And that's just going to give us the tension that we require. So if you watch my other tutorial about satin wrapping a tassel mold, the principle here is exactly the same for creating the warp. How thick the warp is will depend upon what your button mold is, and what type of thread you're using, and all manner of other things. So the next thing to do is to get some strong thread. I'm using a cotton sewing thread that I can't sort of easily break. I also use linen a lot. It really depends upon the button mold you're trying to cover. And I'm just going to have one with a slight dome face, and this is wood. I'm going to take a needle, tapestry, a blunt needle is best. Just make sure that that goes through the hole, because sometimes your holes may need enlarging, or your needles. Pick a different one. So we have the thread, and I've threaded the needle, and I've threaded it singly, so I've got the bit dangling. I know it's hard for you to see. I'm just going to also rub a little bit of beeswax down it. This just helps. It's just a habit I have. What I do stops the threads all slipping everywhere. So the first thing to do is take the end of the strong thread, and you need to work a couple of half hitches, which is, I don't know if you can see that. In fact, if I do this over the purple, you may be able to see it a little bit better. But you create a C shape, you see that, and then bring, so a little bit like you're working a blanket stitch, bring the needle up through, and this is basically just to fasten the strong thread to the covering thread. I like to do that 3 times. You will notice if you watch any of my other tutorials. So with this method, I'm going to start just like with a tassel mold. I'm going to take my needle with the thread. up through from the bottom of the tassel, the button mold. And I'm just going to sit it there. All right. And now I'm going to release some of that. Can you just see still? Yeah. Smooth out the threads. And for this first one, I am going to take my needle and thread back through, and then I'm going to carry on right to the back. And now I'm going to do those half hitches again to fasten that thread to itself. And now I'm going to work flipping and keeping as thin, as flat as I can, working in a diagonal. I'm not taking the thread up and the strong thread up and down through the hole. There are a lot of different ways when you look at vintage buttons that this was done. I suspect part of it had to do with the actual threads that's being used. And you see just here, the reason I unwrap that is you can just see, because we're turning the corner, we're getting a little bit of a loose, a couple of loose threads. And so the thing there is if you can take your thread through at the back, and you can just make a little stitch to hold them as you need it. And this loose one we'll worry about at the end, because you will always get them. Well, not always. Sometimes it goes perfect and you never get them. But yes, it depends on the threads that you're using to cover your button molds and the shape of the button mold, how it would be covered. So we continue spiraling. And then come around. And because I'm about to take that off, I've done the warp a little bit too short. It is best to have a longer warp than a shorter warp. I'm just going to catch that thread right now. And so you see how I'm catching it is just to make a little stitch to tighten it round. And do that now while I'm holding that at tension. Then I can take the last threads off, wrap them round, and again fasten them through. And there are a couple of gaps, and we will deal with those, don't worry. And again, I'm using that half hitch to fasten the threads through and to fasten them to themselves. At the front, you can then just use your nail to swivel them through. Make any other further stitches that are required to make sure that's nice and tight at the back and that everything is caught in. And now knot the thread so that you can get rid of that end. And you have a plain satin covered button mold that you can now cover with any number of decorative elements. So that's method one. Thanks very much for watching. Do please click subscribe and get notified of when I'm uploading new videos. Click like, all that sort of stuff. That really helps the channel out. Thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.